CEO denied black twins at birth. Years later their growth shocked him. There is no way those are my kids. Patrick Shane's words sliced through the delivery room like a blade. He stared at the two dark-skinned infants in Olivia's arms, children who looked nothing like the fantasy he'd constructed in his mind. Despite loving a black woman for 2 years, he'd somehow expected their babies to look like him, to fit seamlessly into his white world. 32 years later, that moment of cowardice would destroy everything he'd built. If you are ready to enjoy the story, please subscribe, like, and share this story to your community. Tomorrow I have more interesting story to share with you. Now relax and enjoy the story. The walls of Patrick Shane's corner office had witnessed countless victories, billion-dollar mergers sealed with handshakes, hostile takeovers executed with surgical precision, and board meetings where grown men trembled at his every word. But on this particular Tuesday morning, as autumn rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago, those same walls seemed to close in around him like the bars of a prison he had built with his own hands. Patrick stood motionless behind his desk, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, his Italian suit immaculate as always. To anyone observing from the outside, he appeared to be the epitome of success, a 60-year-old titan of industry, surveying his kingdom with the satisfaction of a man who had conquered every challenge life had thrown at him. But appearances, as Patrick had learned to his cost, could be devastatingly deceptive. The phone call had come exactly 7 minutes ago. 7 minutes that had somehow managed to unravel 32 years of carefully constructed denial, 32 years of telling himself that some decisions, once made, were too buried to ever resurface. The voice on the other end had been crisp, professional, tinged with the kind of authority that came from delivering life-altering news on a daily basis. "Mr. Shane, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez from St. Mary's Children's Hospital. I'm calling about Marcus and Maya Henderson. They're 32 years old, and they're dying." The words had hit him like physical blows, each syllable carrying the weight of a past he had spent decades trying to forget. Marcus and Maya. Names he had never allowed himself to speak aloud, faces he had trained himself not to remember, voices he had never heard except in the nightmares that sometimes pierced through his pharmaceutical-aided sleep. Patrick's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the crystal tumbler on his desk, the amber liquid inside catching the gray morning light. Whiskey at 8:47 a.m., a habit his late wife Catherine would have found appalling, though she had never known the real reason behind his occasional morning indulgences. There were many things Catherine had never known, many truths he had buried so deep that sometimes even he almost believed they had never existed. The intercom on his desk buzzed with its usual efficiency. "Mr. Shane?" His assistant Margaret's voice carried its customary blend of deference and barely concealed impatience. "Your 9 a.m. with the Henderson Group is here. Should I send them in?" Henderson. The name struck him like lightning, though he knew it was merely coincidence, or perhaps the universe's cruel sense of irony. "Cancel it," he said, his voice hoarser than he intended. "Cancel everything today." A pause. In 15 years of working for him, Margaret had never heard him cancel an entire day of meetings. "Sir? Are you feeling all right? Am I feeling all right?" The question would have been laughable if it weren't so tragically loaded. When was the last time he had felt truly all right? When was the last time he had looked in the mirror and seen a man he could respect rather than a stranger wearing an expensive mask? "I'm fine, Margaret. Just handle it." He disconnected the intercom and turned back to the window, where the rain continued its relentless assault on the glass. Somewhere out there, in a hospital he had driven past countless times without ever truly seeing it, 2 people lay dying. 2 people who shared his DNA, his blood, his genetic legacy, and who had grown up knowing that their father had taken one look at them and decided they weren't worth staying for. The memory crashed over him with surprising clarity, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday instead of over 3 decades ago. The sterile smell of the delivery room. Olivia's exhausted but radiant face as she cradled 2 impossibly small beings against her chest. The way the fluorescent lights had cast harsh shadows across dark skin that bore no resemblance to the fantasy he had unconsciously constructed in his mind. "They're beautiful, Patrick. Look at them, they're perfect." But all he had seen was difference. All he had felt was the crushing weight of a choice he had never consciously prepared for, but somehow always known he would have to make. Standing there in that delivery room, surrounded by the miracle of new life, he had made the decision that would define him for the rest of his days. "They're not mine." 3 words. 3 simple words that had destroyed everything: Olivia's trust, his children's future, and whatever remained of his own soul. Patrick drained the whiskey in one burning gulp and reached for his coat. For 32 years, he had been running from that moment, building walls of money and power and respectability to keep the truth at bay. But some truths, he was learning, had a way of finding you no matter how far or how fast you ran. Dr. Vasquez had given him an address, a room number, a choice. "They've been asking about their father," she had said. "Their mother, Olivia, she passed 5 years ago, but she left very specific instructions. She believed you would come when they needed you most." As Patrick stepped into the elevator that would carry him down from his tower of success to the street level, where ordinary mortals lived and died and made choices they would have to live with forever, one question echoed in his mind with devastating clarity. After 32 years of denial, what did you say to the children you had abandoned before they had even drawn their first breath? What do you think drives a person to deny their own children? Have you ever had to confront a choice from your past that you thought was buried forever? Share your thoughts below. The drive to St. Mary's Children's Hospital should have taken 23 minutes according to Patrick's GPS, but he found himself taking the long way, circling blocks he had no business being in, sitting at green lights until impatient drivers behind him honked their horns. Each delay felt like borrowing time from an inevitable reckoning, like a condemned man savoring his last meal. Patrick Shane had built his fortune on the principle that information was power, but as he navigated Chicago's medical district at age 58, he realized he knew virtually nothing about the 2 people who were about to become the most important part of his life. What he did know came in fragments, pieces of a puzzle he had spent 32 years refusing to assemble. Marcus and Maya Henderson, they had taken Olivia's maiden name, a detail that shouldn't have surprised him, but somehow cut deeper than expected. They were 32, which meant they had lived entire lives, built careers, formed relationships, experienced heartbreak and triumph, and every emotion in between, all while carrying the knowledge that their father had rejected them before they were old enough to understand what rejection meant. The weight of those lost years pressed against his chest like a physical force. 32 Christmases he had missed. 64 birthdays, his children's and his own, that had passed without acknowledgement. First days of school, graduation ceremonies, broken hearts mended by mothers who had to play both parental roles because one parent had chosen cowardice over courage. Patrick's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Rescheduled your meetings. Board wants to know about the Morrison acquisition timeline." The Morrison acquisition, a deal worth $200 million that had consumed his thoughts for months. Now it seemed as insignificant as Monopoly money, a game played by men who had forgotten what actually mattered in life. He thought about Olivia as he turned into the hospital parking garage, remembering details he had spent decades trying to suppress. The way she laughed at her own jokes before delivering the punchline. How she would steal his sweaters on Sunday mornings and look more beautiful in his Columbia University hoodie than she did in the designer dresses he bought her. The fierce intelligence that blazed in her dark eyes when she talked about her dream of opening a medical practice in underserved communities. "I want to heal people," she had told him once, lying in his arms in the penthouse apartment that now felt like a mausoleum. "Not just treat symptoms, but actually heal the wounds that poverty and neglect leave behind. I want to matter, Patrick. Don't you want to matter?" He had kissed her forehead and murmured something about already mattering, about the jobs he created and the economic impact of his companies. But even then, some part of him had known that what he called mattering was just elaborate scorekeeping, a way of measuring worth that had nothing to do with the human cost of his choices. Olivia had mattered. Even as a medical student juggling classes and clinical rotations, She had volunteered at free clinics, tutored underprivileged kids, sent half her scholarship money home to help her younger siblings through school. She had possessed the kind of goodness that couldn't be bought or manufactured, the kind of moral compass that Patrick had always admired in others while secretly believing it was a luxury he couldn't afford. The parking garage was nearly full, forcing Patrick to circle up to the 4th level before finding a space. As he sat in his Mercedes, engine ticking as it cooled, he tried to imagine what Marcus and Maya had become. Did they have Olivia's laugh? Her fierce determination to heal the world? Did they carry any trace of the Shane ambition, or had his abandonment purged them of any desire to follow in his footsteps? Dr. Vasquez had been deliberately vague about their condition, mentioning only that it was genetic and that they needed family medical history for treatment options. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same bloodline he had been so ashamed to acknowledge might now be the key to saving the children he had spent their entire lives pretending didn't exist. Patrick's reflection in the rearview mirror showed a man who looked older than his 60 years, silver hair that had once been the same dark brown as his father's, gray eyes that had grown harder with each passing decade. Those eyes had served him well in boardrooms and negotiations, had stared down competitors and intimidated rivals into submission. But what would they see when they looked at Marcus and Maya? What would his children see when they looked back? The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt like ascending to his own judgment day. The hospital smells, antiseptic and floor wax, and something indefinably sad, triggered memories he thought he had successfully buried. Another hospital, another elevator, another time when he had stood at the precipice of fatherhood and chosen to step back into the shadows instead of into the light. He paused outside room 714, his hand frozen on the door handle. Through the small window, he could see 2 beds, 2 figures that remained frustratingly indistinct from this angle. 32 years of wondering, of carefully constructed ignorance, were about to end. In a few moments, he would come face to face with the greatest mistake of his life, or perhaps, if he was lucky, with the greatest opportunity for redemption he would ever receive. Patrick Shane had built an empire on the belief that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. He was about to discover whether love, forgiveness, and the desperate courage of the dying could prove him wrong. The door handle turned under his grip, and he stepped forward into the unknown territory of his children's lives. The first thing Patrick noticed wasn't his children's faces, but their hands. Marcus held a worn paperback novel, something by James Baldwin, the spine cracked from countless readings, while Maya's fingers moved across a sketch pad with the practiced precision of an artist who had found solace in creation. These were the hands of people who had built lives of substance, who had cultivated minds and talents that had nothing to do with stock portfolios or quarterly earnings. The second thing he noticed was how they looked up at him with identical expressions of guarded curiosity, as if they had been expecting this moment their entire lives while simultaneously hoping it would never come. "You must be Patrick," Maya said, her voice carrying a melody that was purely Olivia's, though tempered with something sharper, more cautious. She was beautiful in a way that transcended the hospital gown and the 4 tubes snaking from her arm, the kind of beauty that came from intelligence and compassion rather than genetics, though she had inherited the best of both parents. Marcus closed his book deliberately, using his finger to mark his place, as if this interruption might be brief. When he looked up, Patrick felt the full force of his own gray eyes staring back at him, but where his had grown cold and calculating over the decades, Marcus's burned with a quiet intensity that spoke of passion held in careful check. "The famous Patrick Shane," Marcus said, and there was no warmth in his voice, no invitation for reconciliation. "Mom always said you'd show up eventually. I guess dying was dramatic enough to finally get your attention." The words hit Patrick like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the guilt he had carried for 3 decades. But beneath Marcus's anger, he heard something else, pain so deep and old that it had crystallized into a kind of protective armor. Patrick began, then stopped. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That he had made a mistake? That he had spent 32 years thinking about this moment? All of those things were true, but they were also inadequate, pathetic offerings in the face of a lifetime of absence. Maya set down her sketch pad and studied him with the kind of clinical assessment she must have inherited from Olivia's medical training. "You look exactly like your photos," she said. "Mom kept newspaper clippings about your business deals. She said it was important for us to know where we came from, even if where we came from didn't want to know us." The casual cruelty of the statement was devastating precisely because it wasn't delivered with cruelty at all. Maya spoke as if she were commenting on the weather, as if his abandonment was simply a fact of life that she had long since processed and filed away. "Dr. Vasquez said you were sick," Patrick managed, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "She said you needed family medical history." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family medical history? That's rich. Do you even remember what you said to Mom in that delivery room? Because we do. She told us the story enough times that I could recite it word for word." Patrick felt the blood drain from his face. Of course Olivia had told them. Why wouldn't she? The truth was often cruel, but it was still the truth. "You said we weren't yours," Maya continued, her voice still maddeningly calm. "You took one look at us and decided we were too dark, too different, too inconvenient for the life you had planned. So you walked away and built a nice white family to replace us." "That's not," Patrick started, but Marcus cut him off. "What? That's not how it happened? That's not what you meant. That's not who you are." Marcus's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. "Save it. We've had 32 years to figure out exactly who you are, Mr. Shane. You're the kind of man who abandons his children because they don't match his expectations. You're the kind of father who can live with himself while his kids grow up wondering what they did wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Patrick stood frozen in the doorway, still holding the roses he had bought in the hospital gift shop, an absurd gesture that now seemed almost insulting in its inadequacy. 24 red roses to apologize for 32 years of absence. Even he could see the mathematics didn't work. "We're dying," Maya said finally. "Marcus and I both have Huntington's disease. It's genetic, degenerative, and fatal. The doctors say we might have 5 years if we're lucky." Patrick felt the world tilt. "I don't understand. I've never been tested, never shown symptoms. It can skip generations or manifest later," Maya explained with clinical precision. "Your paternal grandfather died in an asylum in 1962. The family called it nervous exhaustion, but the medical records show classic Huntington's symptoms. Your father died of a heart attack before it could develop. You carry the gene, but at 58, you might never show symptoms. We weren't so lucky." The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. The bloodline he'd been so ashamed to acknowledge was now the key to understanding the disease that was killing the children he'd abandoned. Patrick felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Huntington's disease, he knew the basics, had heard it mentioned in medical contexts over the years. A progressive neurological disorder that destroyed motor function, cognitive ability, emotional control. A death sentence delivered in slow motion. "I didn't know," he whispered. My father died of a heart attack. His father too. I never knew there was anything genetic." "There's a lot you don't know," Marcus said. "About us, about Mom, about the life we built after you decided we weren't worth your time. But here's what you need to know now. We didn't ask Dr. Vasquez to call you. That was Mom's idea, written into her instructions before she died. She believed, God knows why, that you might want to help us when push came to shove." Maya reached for her sketch pad again, flipping to a page near the back. "She drew this," she said, holding up a charcoal portrait that made Patrick's breath catch in his throat. It was him, but not as he had ever seen himself, younger, softer, with eyes that held hope instead of calculation. It was the man he might have been if he had made different choices, if he had stayed in that delivery room and learned to love what he had been given instead of mourning what he had expected. "She never stopped believing you were good underneath all the fear," Maya said. "Even after everything, she thought there was still time for you to become the father she fell in love with. The question is, was she right, or did we just inherit her talent for seeing the best in people who don't deserve it?" Patrick stared at the drawing, at this version of himself that existed only in Olivia's imagination and memory. For 32 years, he had been running from the man in that portrait, building walls of money and power and respectability to hide from the person he might have been. Now his children, dying children who owed him nothing, were offering him the chance to become that man at last. But first, he would have to face the hardest truth of all. That love, real love, wasn't about deserving or earning or meeting expectations. It was about showing up, staying present, and learning to see beauty in what was rather than mourning what might have been. Do you think it's ever too late for a parent to earn their child's forgiveness? What would you say to someone who abandoned you if they suddenly appeared when you needed them most? The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and strangely natural to Patrick. Every morning at 7 a.m., he would arrive at St. Mary's with coffee for the nurses and whatever books or art supplies Marcus and Maya had mentioned wanting. Every evening at 8 p.m., he would leave feeling like he had learned something profound about his children, while simultaneously realizing how much remained unknown. Marcus proved to be the more challenging of the twins, his anger a living thing that filled the spaces between their careful conversations. He was a high school music teacher, Patrick learned, a detail that shouldn't have surprised him, but somehow did. The boy who had grown up without a father had dedicated his life to nurturing other people's children, coaxing beauty from reluctant teenage voices, and finding potential in kids that others had written off. Ironic, isn't it? Marcus said one afternoon when Patrick commented on a thank you card from a former student who had just been accepted to Juilliard. The kid you abandoned because he wasn't good enough grows up to specialize in finding worth in supposedly worthless kids. Maya was different, softer in her approach, but perhaps more devastating in her observations. She worked as a pediatric art therapist, helping children process trauma through creation. Her sketch pad was filled with drawings of her young patients, a 6-year-old's crayon rendering of a family that included a new stepfather, a teenager's angry charcoal slashes that somehow resolved into something beautiful. Children are remarkably resilient, Maya told Patrick as she showed him a watercolor painted by a 7-year-old who had witnessed domestic violence. They can forgive almost anything if they feel safe enough to heal. The question is whether the adults in their lives are brave enough to do the work of earning that forgiveness. The medical consultations were brutal in their clinical precision. Dr. Sarah Chun, the neurologist overseeing their care, explained Huntington's disease with the kind of thoroughness that left no room for false hope. Progressive deterioration of motor function, cognitive decline, emotional instability, all leading inevitably to death, usually within 10 to 20 years of symptom onset. The twins are fortunate in one sense, Dr. Chin said during a consultation that Patrick attended at Maya's invitation. They're both showing later onset than average, which typically means a slower progression. But they'll need extensive support systems as the disease advances. Family involvement makes a significant difference in quality of life. Family involvement. The phrase echoed in Patrick's mind as he sat through meeting after meeting with social workers, physical therapists, and genetic counselors. For 32 years, he had convinced himself that Marcus and Maya were better off without him. Now he was learning that his absence hadn't protected them from anything. It had simply meant they had faced every challenge with one less resource than they deserved. The experimental treatment Dr. Vasquez had mentioned proved to be a clinical trial at Northwestern Memorial, one of only 3 programs in the country testing a new gene therapy approach. The waiting list was 18 months long, but Patrick's connections and willingness to fund additional research positions had secured spots for both twins within 2 weeks. Money can't cure Huntington's, Maya observed when Patrick explained how he had expedited their enrollment. But it can buy time, and time is the one thing we don't have enough of. The comment stung because it was true. Every interaction with his children was shadowed by the knowledge that their relationship had an expiration date, that whatever healing might happen between them would have to happen quickly. There was no luxury of taking years to rebuild trust, no opportunity for the slow evolution that normal families enjoyed. Patrick found himself staying later each evening, reluctant to return to his empty penthouse. Catherine had been gone for 3 years, Cancer, swift and merciless, and their two children lived on opposite coasts, pursuing careers that kept them conveniently distant from their father's increasingly isolated existence. James was a corporate lawyer in Seattle, coldly efficient like his father, but without Patrick's driving ambition. Sarah worked in sustainable development in Portland, her choices a deliberate rejection of everything the Shane family fortune represented. Neither James nor Sarah knew about Marcus and Maya, a fact that was becoming increasingly difficult to justify, even to himself. How did you explain to your legitimate children that they had siblings you had never mentioned? How did you tell them that the moral high ground they occupied was built on the foundation of their father's greatest shame? "You're thinking too hard again," Maya said one evening when she caught him staring out the window with the expression she had learned to recognize as his guilt spiral. "I can practically hear the gears grinding." "I was thinking about my other children," Patrick admitted. "James and Sarah. They don't know about you." Marcus looked up from the chess set they had been using for their nightly games, a ritual that had started when Patrick mentioned he played and Marcus had suggested they test their skills against each other. So far, Marcus was winning more games than he lost, a fact that seemed to give him considerable satisfaction. "The legitimate heirs," Marcus said, moving his queen into a position that threatened Patrick's king. "Must be nice to have children you're not ashamed to claim." "I'm not ashamed of you," Patrick said quickly, then stopped. Was that true? After 32 years of denial, could he honestly claim he wasn't ashamed? "I was ashamed of myself, of my cowardice, of what claiming you would have meant about who I really was." "And what would it have meant?" Maya asked, setting down her sketch pad to give him her full attention. Patrick considered the question, really considered it for perhaps the first time in 3 decades. "It would have meant I was the kind of man who loved a black woman and was proud of his biracial children. It would have meant standing up to my family, my social circle, my business associates. It would have meant choosing love over convenience." "So you chose convenience," Marcus said, not looking up from the chessboard. "Check, by the way." Patrick studied the board, seeing the trap Marcus had laid several moves earlier. His king was indeed in check, with limited options for escape. Rather like his current situation with his children, cornered by 32 years of poor choices, forced to confront the consequences of his cowardice. "I chose fear," Patrick said, moving his king to the only available square. "I was 28 years old and terrified of losing everything I thought mattered. So I lost the only things that actually did matter." "Mom used to say that courage wasn't about not being afraid," Maya said softly. "It was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. She said you had been brave once, when you first loved her. She wondered if you might find that courage again someday." The chess game continued in companionable silence, but Patrick's mind was elsewhere, replaying conversations with Olivia from decades past. She had indeed been brave enough to love him despite his family's disapproval, brave enough to raise their children alone, brave enough to keep believing in his capacity for goodness even after he had proven her wrong. "Checkmate," Marcus announced, though his tone held none of its usual triumph. "You played well, but you were too focused on protecting your king instead of developing your other pieces. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense." Patrick stared at the board, seeing the metaphor with painful clarity. For 32 years, he had been playing defense, protecting his position, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. But defense alone never won games, in chess or in life. At some point, you had to risk everything you had built in order to achieve something greater. As visiting hours ended and Patrick prepared to leave for another lonely night in his tower of success, Maya handed him a sketch she had been working on during their conversation. It showed the 3 of them around the chess board, but rendered in the style of a family portrait, natural, warm, unguarded. In the drawing, Patrick looked like the man from Olivia's earlier sketch, but older, marked by experience but not hardened by it. "This is how I see us," Maya said simply. "Not perfect, not without complications, but real. The question is whether you're ready to stop playing defense and start playing for something worth winning." Walking through the hospital corridors toward the parking garage, Patrick realized that his children had been teaching him something crucial about the nature of time. They didn't have years to waste on gradual reconciliation, which meant every conversation, every gesture, every moment of connection had to count. They were showing him how to love urgently, completely, without the luxury of assuming there would always be tomorrow to repair the damage of today. But first, he would have to make a choice that had been decades in the making. Whether to finally tell James and Sarah about their siblings, and in doing so, reveal the truth about the man they had always believed their father to be. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, jolting Patrick from the restless sleep that had become his nightly routine since entering his children's lives. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried the kind of controlled urgency that medical professionals reserved for true emergencies. "Mr. Shane, you need to get here immediately. Maya's had a seizure, and Marcus is showing signs of rapid cognitive decline. We're moving them both to intensive care." Patrick dressed in the dark, his hands shaking as he fumbled with buttons and shoelaces. The drive to the hospital blurred past in a haze of red lights and racing heartbeat, his mind refusing to process what Dr. Vasquez's words actually meant. Rapid decline. Intensive care. The clinical terms that had seemed manageable in daylight consultations now felt like death sentences delivered in the pre-dawn darkness. The ICU was a different world from the comfortable private rooms where he had spent the last 3 weeks learning to be a father. Here, machines beeped with mechanical precision, monitoring heartbeats and brain waves and the dozen other measurements that determined whether someone lived or died. Maya lay unconscious, her beautiful face slack beneath a maze of tubes and wires. Marcus was awake but vacant, his sharp intelligence replaced by a confused blankness that was somehow worse than his sister's stillness. "The progression is much faster than we anticipated," Dr. Chen explained, her voice heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles she couldn't win. "Sometimes Huntington's accelerates without warning. We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that we're looking at weeks rather than months." Patrick felt something break inside his chest, a sound like glass shattering in slow motion. 3 weeks. He had been given 3 weeks with his children, and now even that was being stolen from him. 32 years of absence, followed by 21 days of tentative connection, and now time was running out faster than anyone had prepared him for. "There's something else," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice gentler than he had ever heard it. "Maya asked me to give you this if anything happened to her. She's been working on it since you started visiting." The envelope was thick, weighted with more than paper. Inside, Patrick found a letter written in Maya's careful script, along with a second envelope marked "For Marcus when he's ready," and a small key attached to a hospital bracelet. "Dear Patrick, if you're reading this, then my body has decided to accelerate the timeline we were all pretending we had more control over. Don't blame yourself. This disease has its own agenda, and guilt won't change its course. I've spent the last 3 weeks watching you try to figure out how to be our father, and I want you to know that you've been succeeding in ways you probably don't realize. Not because you've been perfect, you haven't, but because you've been present. For the first time in our lives, you've been choosing us over your comfort, your reputation, your fear. That matters more than you know. The key is to a storage unit downtown. Mom kept things there, photos, letters, videos she recorded for us over the years. She always believed you would come back eventually, and she wanted you to understand who we became while you were gone. More importantly, she wanted you to understand who she remained despite everything. Marcus is angry, and he has every right to be. But underneath that anger is a love so fierce it terrifies him. He's afraid to care about you, because caring about people who leave is what broke our hearts in the first place. Be patient with him. Be present for him in ways you never were for us as children. Show him that some people can change, that some love can be trusted. There's one more thing you need to know, and I'm telling you this because someone has to, and I might not get another chance, that we found out about James and Sarah when I was 16. Not through any dramatic revelation, just a newspaper photo of you at some charity gala with your family. We weren't angry exactly. We understood that you'd built the life you wanted, the one that made sense to you. But it hurt to see you being the father to them that you'd chosen not to be to us. They looked like you in ways we never could. They had your name, your world, your approval. But they also grew up with the emotional distance that comes from having a father who mistakes provision for love. In some ways, we all paid the price for your fear. They just got the financial benefits along with the emotional cost. But they deserve to know about us, just like we deserve to know about them. Not because it will be easy or comfortable, but because family, real family, isn't about comfort. It's about truth, even when truth is complicated and painful and threatens to destroy the neat stories we tell ourselves about who we are. I won't be able to see how this all turns out, but I have faith in you. Not because you've earned it, but because Mom's faith in people was usually right, even when it took decades to prove it. You have a chance now to be the father you were always capable of being. Don't waste it on guilt or regret. Use it to love the people who are still here to be loved. With hope for your happiness, Maya. P.S. The drawing I gave you last week wasn't just how I see us now. It was how I see us in whatever comes after this. Some connections transcend time and space and even death. We'll always be your children, Patrick. The question is whether you'll always be our father. Patrick read the letter 3 times before the words stopped blurring through his tears. Maya had known she was dying, not just eventually, but soon, and she had spent her energy trying to heal the wounds that his absence had created. Even facing her own mortality, she had been thinking about his happiness, his redemption, his chance to become the man Olivia had always believed he could be. The storage unit was in a nondescript building 20 minutes from the hospital. Patrick had never imagined that such a place could contain the archive of a life, but that's what Olivia had created in the modest space she had rented for 15 years. Boxes of photographs chronicling Marcus and Maya's childhood, first steps, school plays, graduation ceremonies, all the milestones he had missed. Videos of Olivia talking to the camera, sometimes alone, sometimes with the children, creating a record of their lives for a father she still believed might return. Today is Marcus and Maya's 5th birthday, Olivia said in one video, her face older than Patrick remembered, but still luminous with the kind of inner light that had first drawn him to her. They asked why their daddy couldn't come to their party, and I told them he was working very hard somewhere far away, but that he loved them and thought about them every day. I hope that's true, Patrick. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you know that you have 2 beautiful children who would love nothing more than to know their father. There were letters too, dozens of them, written but never sent, chronicling the twins' development and Olivia's own journey as a single mother. Letters describing Marcus's first piano recital and Maya's first art show, letters asking for advice about teenage rebellions and college applications, letters that grew shorter and more philosophical as the years passed, and hope became something more resigned, but no less real. The final video was dated just 6 months before Olivia's death. She looked frail but determined, speaking directly into the camera with the intensity of someone who knew her time was limited. If you're watching this, then Maya or Marcus is sick, and you've finally come back to us. I want you to know that I never regretted loving you, Patrick, even though loving you broke my heart. I never regretted having your children, even though raising them alone was the hardest thing I've ever done. They are the best parts of both of us, and they deserve to know their father. I hope it's not too late for you to discover that they're also the best parts of you. Patrick sat in that storage unit until dawn, surrounded by the evidence of a life he had abandoned, but that had continued without him. When he finally returned to the hospital, he found Marcus awake and lucid, sitting beside Maya's bed holding her hand. "She's not going to wake up," Marcus said without looking at Patrick. "The doctors won't say it outright, but I can see it in their faces. Her brain activity is minimal. We're looking at days, maybe hours." "I'm sorry," Patrick said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "I'm so sorry for all of it." "Are you?" Marcus asked, finally turning to face him. "Or are you sorry that you're losing something you just discovered you wanted? Because there's a difference, and Maya deserved better than grief born out of guilt." It was a fair question, and Patrick forced himself to consider it honestly. "Both," he said finally. "I'm sorry for 32 years of cowardice, and I'm sorry that my daughter is dying before I could become the father she deserved. I'm sorry for all the time we lost, and I'm sorry that I don't have time to earn your forgiveness properly." Marcus studied his face for a long moment, searching for something Patrick couldn't identify. Finally, he spoke with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from difficult decisions made in impossible circumstances. "She believed in you," Marcus said simply. "Maya always believed people could change, could become better than they were. I never shared her optimism, but I'm willing to let her be right about this one thing. I'm willing to let you try to be our father, if only because she died believing it was possible." The machines monitoring Maya's vital signs continued their electronic lament, marking time in a rhythm that was slowing with each passing hour. But in the space between heartbeats, Patrick heard something else. The sound of a door opening, a chance being offered, a family being born out of loss and forgiveness, and the desperate courage of the dying. Maya died at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, while Patrick was reading to her from a collection of Langston Hughes poetry, the same book he had found dog-eared and highlighted in Olivia's storage unit. She slipped away quietly, without fanfare or final words, her hand growing still in Marcus's grip as the machines around her bed gradually fell silent. The silence that followed was devastating in its completeness. Marcus sat frozen beside his sister's bed, his face empty of expression, his breathing shallow and mechanical. Patrick stood on the other side of the room, feeling like an intruder in this moment of profound grief, uncertain whether he had earned the right to mourn alongside the son, who had only just begun to accept his presence. Dr. Vasquez handled the medical formalities with the kind of gentle efficiency that spoke of too much experience with death. Time of death, organ donation decisions, funeral arrangements, a checklist of finalities that reduced a life of infinite possibility to a series of administrative tasks. Through it all, Marcus remained motionless, staring at his sister's face as if he could will her back to consciousness through sheer force of love. "Marcus," Patrick said finally, his voice hoarse from reading poetry for hours. There are things we need to discuss. Arrangements to make." "No," Marcus said, the single word carrying the weight of absolute refusal. "There's nothing to discuss. Maya made her wishes clear years ago. She wants to be cremated, scattered in Lake Michigan where Mom used to take us on Sundays. Simple memorial service, no speeches from people who didn't know her. I can handle it myself." The dismissal was clear, and Patrick felt something crucial slipping away from him, just as he had begun to grasp it. "Let me help. Please. She was my daughter too." Marcus finally looked at him, and the expression in his eyes was devastating. Not anger anymore, but something worse. "Pity. Was she? Because from where I'm sitting, you were her father for exactly 24 days. I've been her brother for 32 years. I think I know what she would have wanted." The words hit Patrick like physical blows, each one precisely aimed at the guilt he had been carrying since that first phone call from Dr. Vasquez. 24 days. Such a pitifully small amount of time to call himself a father, such an inadequate foundation on which to build a claim to grief. "You're right," Patrick said, backing toward the door. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have presumed." "No," Marcus said, turning back to Maya's still form. "You shouldn't have." The funeral home was everything Patrick had expected. Tasteful, expensive, designed to make grief feel manageable through the application of marble and mahogany and soft classical music. Marcus had chosen the least ostentatious option available, a simple memorial service followed by cremation, with calling hours limited to 2 afternoons for what he grimly referred to as the people who actually knew her. Patrick spent those calling hours standing in the back of the room, watching as Maya's life was celebrated by the people who had truly mattered to her. Former students brought artwork she had helped them create. Colleagues from the hospital shared stories of her patience with difficult children and her ability to find beauty in the darkest circumstances. A steady stream of parents thanked Marcus for the ways Maya had helped their children heal from traumas that traditional therapy couldn't reach. It was a testament to a life well lived, a career dedicated to healing others, a woman who had found purpose and meaning despite growing up with the constant knowledge that her father had found her lacking from the moment of her birth. Patrick felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a story that had nothing to do with him, an irrelevant footnote in the tale of his daughter's accomplished life. James and Sarah arrived on the second day, having flown in from their respective coasts after Patrick's awkward phone calls explaining the existence of siblings they had never known about. The conversations had been brutal in their brevity, shock, anger, and disappointment delivered in the clipped tones that Patrick recognized as his own emotional vocabulary passed down to the next generation. 32 years, Sarah had said, her voice tight with controlled fury. You had 2 other children for 32 years and never thought to mention them? What kind of man does that? The kind of man he had been, Patrick thought, but didn't say. The kind of man who compartmentalized love and arranged his life according to social convenience rather than moral courage. The kind of man who had raised his legitimate children to value appearances over authenticity, success over integrity. James was characteristically blunt in his assessment. This is a public relations nightmare, Dad. The press gets hold of this story, and Shane Industries stock will tank. Investors don't trust leaders who can't manage their personal lives. You need to contain this situation before it spirals out of control. This isn't about stock prices, Patrick said, surprised by the exhaustion in his own voice. This is about family, about trying to do right by people I wronged. Family? James laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the family you abandoned before they could walk, or the family you raised to believe we were your only children? Because you can't have both, Dad. You can't rewrite history because it's suddenly convenient. The memorial service itself was a masterclass in understatement. Maya's colleagues spoke about her compassion and creativity. A former student, now studying art therapy at Northwestern, read a poem Maya had helped her write about finding light in darkness. Marcus played a piece he had composed for his sister, something beautiful and heartbreaking that spoke of love and loss, and the particular grief that comes from losing the person who knew you best. Patrick sat in the back row beside James and Sarah, feeling the weight of their disapproval and his own inadequacy. He had no right to speak at this service, no stories to share that wouldn't highlight his own absence from the narrative of Maya's life. He was a stranger mourning the death of a daughter he had barely known, a father whose grief felt presumptuous and unearned. After the service, as people gathered in small groups sharing memories and offering comfort, Patrick found himself alone in the corner of the reception hall. The isolation felt appropriate. He was, after all, the outsider here, the man who had forfeited his right to communal grief through 32 years of willful absence. You look like you're planning to disappear again, a voice said behind him. Dr. Vasquez approached with 2 cups of coffee, her expression unreadable. Maya specifically asked me to watch for that. She asked you to watch for what? For you running away when things got difficult. She said you had a pattern of leaving when the emotional cost got too high. She made me promise to remind you that some things are worth staying for, even when they hurt. Patrick accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth of the cup to steady his shaking hands. Marcus doesn't want me here. My other children are ashamed of me. Maya's gone. What exactly am I supposed to stay for? Marcus, Dr. Vasquez said simply. He's about to face this disease alone, and despite what he said to you at the hospital, he needs his father. Not the father you were 32 years ago, and not the father you wish you had been, but the father you can choose to be right now. He made it clear that I don't have the right to claim that title. Rights are earned, Mr. Shane. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to earn them, or whether you're going to let grief and guilt convince you that some bridges can't be rebuilt. Across the room, Patrick could see Marcus standing alone by the memorial table, staring at a photograph of Maya from her college graduation. He looked older than his 32 years, worn down by loss and facing a future that promised only more deterioration and eventual death. In that moment, Patrick saw not the angry young man who had challenged him in the hospital, but a scared child who had lost the most important person in his world and was trying to figure out how to face what came next. He's going to need full-time care within 2 years, Dr. Vasquez continued. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, eventually round-the-clock nursing assistance. His insurance will cover some of it, but not everything. He's too proud to ask for help, but too smart not to know he's going to need it. The implication was clear, and Patrick felt the familiar weight of choices that would define the rest of his life. He could walk away again, return to his empty penthouse and his corporate responsibilities, leaving Marcus to face his deteriorating future alone. Or he could stay, fight for a relationship that neither of them was sure they wanted, and try to build something meaningful out of the wreckage of 32 years of absence. "I don't know how to be his father," Patrick admitted. "I don't know how to earn forgiveness for something this profound." "Then maybe," Dr. Vasquez said gently, "you start by learning how to be his friend." As the reception began to wind down and people started to leave, Patrick made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He walked across the room to where Marcus stood alone, grief radiating from him like heat from a fever. "I know you don't want me here," Patrick said quietly. "I know I have no right to ask anything from you, but I'm not leaving again. Whatever happens next, however long it takes, I'm not walking away this time." Marcus didn't look at him, but Patrick saw his shoulders tense. "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why now, when it's too late to matter?" "Because Maya believed it wasn't too late," Patrick said. "Because you deserve to have someone fight for you the way she did. Because I'm tired of being the kind of man who runs away from love when it gets complicated." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus turned, and Patrick saw tears on his son's face, the first tears he had witnessed since Maya's death. "I don't know how to let you help me," Marcus said. "I don't know how to trust someone who left once and might leave again." "Then we'll figure it out together," Patrick said. "One day at a time, for as long as we have." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't redemption or reconciliation, or any of the neat resolutions that Patrick's business mind preferred. It was simply two broken people, bound by genetics and loss and the desperate hope that love could be learned, even late in life, even in the shadow of death. But as they stood together in that reception hall, surrounded by the evidence of Maya's well-lived life, Patrick allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was enough to begin. The turning point came 6 weeks after Maya's funeral, in the most unlikely of places, a dingy community center in Garfield Park where Marcus taught an after-school music program for kids whose families couldn't afford private lessons. Patrick had been following his son at a respectful distance for weeks, showing up at medical appointments uninvited, leaving groceries on Marcus's doorstep, sending texts that went unanswered. He was learning the art of persistent presence, being available without being pushy, caring without claiming credit. Marcus had returned to work against Dr. Chen's advice, insisting that his students needed consistency, even as his own motor control showed the early signs of deterioration. His left hand trembled slightly when he conducted, and sometimes he forgot the names of pieces he had been teaching for years, but his passion for drawing music from reluctant young voices remained undimmed. Patrick stood in the hallway outside the music room, listening to Marcus work with a group of middle schoolers on a simplified version of Amazing Grace. The kids ranged in age from 11 to 14, a mix of ethnicities and attitudes that would have challenged any teacher, but Marcus had a gift for finding the melody in chaos. "Keisha, I know you think you can't sing, but I heard you humming Beyoncé this morning, and your pitch was perfect," Marcus said, his voice patient but firm. "Music isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. And you, Deshawn, stop hiding in the back. Your voice is changing, which means it's getting stronger, not weaker." Through the small window in the door, Patrick watched his son work with the kind of natural authority that couldn't be taught. Marcus moved between the students with easy confidence, adjusting posture, demonstrating breathing techniques, coaxing reluctant voices into harmony. These children adored him. It was obvious in the way they lit up when he praised them, the way they leaned in when he spoke, the way they followed his directions even when they were clearly outside their comfort zones. "Mr. Henderson," a small voice piped up from the front row. "My mama says you're sick. She says that's why you shake sometimes. Are you going to be okay?" The question hung in the air like a discordant note, and Patrick saw Marcus's shoulders tense. But when his son turned to face the children, his expression was calm, honest, unafraid. "I have a disease that affects my brain and my muscles," Marcus said simply. "It's going to get worse over time, and eventually it will make it hard for me to teach music. But right now, today, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I love to do, with exactly the people I want to be with. That's what matters." A 12-year-old named Aaliyah raised her hand tentatively. "Are you scared?" Marcus considered the question seriously, treating it with the respect it deserved. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'm more grateful than scared. Grateful that I get to make music with all of you. Grateful that I had a sister who taught me how to find beauty, even when things are difficult. Grateful that I learned love is bigger than fear." Patrick felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than pride or admiration. This was what courage looked like, not the absence of fear, but the choice to live fully despite it. Marcus was teaching these children more than music. He was showing them how to face the future with grace, how to find meaning in whatever time you're given, how to love without guarantees. After the lesson ended, and the students had been picked up by parents or walked home in small groups, Patrick finally entered the music room. Marcus was packing up his sheet music with movements that were becoming slightly more deliberate, slightly more careful than they had been even a month ago. "How long have you been standing out there?" Marcus asked without looking up. "Long enough to see why Maya was so proud of you," Patrick said. "Long enough to understand what she meant when she said you had her gift for healing." Marcus paused in his packing, his hands stilling on a stack of song sheets. "She never said that." "She did. In one of her letters to me, the ones I found in Olivia's storage unit. She said you inherited your mother's ability to see potential in broken things and help them become whole again." For the first time in weeks, Marcus looked directly at Patrick. "Why are you here? Really? Not the speech about not walking away this time, not the guilt about being an absent father. Why are you showing up to my job, following me around, acting like we have some kind of relationship?" It was a fair question, one that Patrick had been asking himself every day since Maya's funeral. The honest answer was complicated, layered with motivations he was still trying to understand. "Because watching you with those kids reminded me of something I'd forgotten," Patrick said slowly. "When I was their age, I wanted to be a teacher. Not a businessman, not a CEO, a music teacher, actually. I played piano, loved Bach and Chopin, and all the classical composers my parents thought were appropriately cultured. But my father convinced me that teaching was a waste of my potential, that I had an obligation to build something larger than myself." Marcus set down his bag and leaned against the piano, studying his father's face. "So you gave up music for money?" "I gave up everything for money," Patrick corrected. "Music, love, integrity, the chance to be the kind of person who mattered to individual lives instead of just economic indicators. I became exactly what my father wanted me to become, and I've spent 32 years trying to convince myself it was worth it. And now," Patrick looked around the small, shabby music room with its outdated instruments and hand-drawn motivational posters. It was the kind of place he would have dismissed without a second thought just 2 months ago, but now he saw it clearly. A space where real education happened, where lives were changed one note at a time, where a dying man chose to spend his remaining energy giving gifts to children who desperately needed them. "Now I think you're doing what I should have done with my life," Patrick said. "You're using whatever time you have to make the world better for people who need it most. You're teaching those kids that their voices matter, that beauty can come from anywhere, that hope is stronger than circumstances. That's what legacy actually looks like." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently picking out a melody on the piano keys. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Patrick had ever heard it. "The experimental treatment isn't working," Marcus said. "Dr. Chen ran new tests last week. The progression is accelerating faster than they hoped. I've got maybe 18 months before I won't be able to teach anymore, maybe 3 years before I need full-time care." The words hit Patrick like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain steady. This wasn't about his grief or his regrets. This was about his son facing an impossible future and choosing to share the burden with the father who had never earned the right to carry it. "What do you need?" Patrick asked. "From me, from anyone. What would help?" "I need to know that this program will continue after I can't run it anymore," Marcus said. "These kids don't have anywhere else to go for music education. Their schools have cut arts funding. Their families can't afford private lessons. This is it for them. I need to know that someone will fight for them when I can't." Patrick felt something click into place, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since he was young enough to believe he could change the world. "I'll fund it. Full scholarships, new instruments, whatever it takes. We'll expand it, bring in more teachers, serve more kids. It'll be your legacy, but I'll make sure it lives on." "I don't want your money," Marcus said quickly. "I want your time. I want you to learn these kids' names, understand their stories, care about their futures. I want you to be here, not just writing checks from your office tower." It was a challenge and an invitation wrapped together, a chance for Patrick to prove that his commitment went deeper than financial convenience. "Teach me," he said. "Show me how to do this right." Marcus studied his father's face, searching for something Patrick couldn't identify. Finally, he reached into his bag and pulled out a simple folder filled with student information sheets, names, ages, family situations, musical goals. "Keisha Williams," Marcus said, pointing to the first sheet. 13 years old, lives with her grandmother, wants to audition for the Performing Arts High School, but doesn't think she's good enough. She has perfect pitch and a voice that could take her anywhere, but she's afraid to believe in herself because disappointment feels dangerous when you don't have much to begin with. Patrick took the folder, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. These weren't just names on paper, they were lives that Marcus had been nurturing, dreams he had been protecting, futures he was helping to build one lesson at a time. "I want to learn," Patrick said. "I want to understand what matters to you, what Maya saw in this work, what Olivia was trying to teach me about using privilege to serve others instead of just enriching myself." "It's not easy," Marcus warned. "These kids will test you, challenge you, break your heart on a regular basis. They'll make you question everything you think you know about fairness and opportunity and what people deserve from life." "Good," Patrick said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. "Maybe it's time someone challenged me to become better than I've been." As they walked out of the community center together, Patrick felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the sense that he was moving towards something meaningful rather than running away from something difficult. For the first time since that devastating phone call from Dr. Vasquez, he allowed himself to hope that the time he had left with Marcus, however long or short it might be, could be used to build something worth leaving behind. Sometimes the most profound transformations happen not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of choosing service over self-interest. What would it look like to use your remaining time, whatever amount that might be, to invest in someone else's dreams? 8 months later, Patrick stood in the Marcus Henderson Music Center, watching his son conduct what would be his final concert. The community center had been transformed through urgent funding and passionate community support, everyone understanding that time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. What had started as an after-school program now served over 200 children across 3 locations, with a waiting list that stretched into the hundreds. Marcus moved carefully across the stage, his tremors more pronounced but his passion undimmed. At 31, he was facing the final months of his ability to teach, but he had poured everything into training his replacement and ensuring the program would survive his absence. James and Sarah sat beside Patrick, both having taken emergency leave from their jobs when they learned their half-brother was dying. The shock of discovering Marcus and Maya had forced them to confront their own relationship with their father, the emotional distance they'd normalized, the love they'd assumed but never felt. "I still don't understand it," Sarah had said during a tense family dinner 6 months earlier. "You abandoned Marcus and Maya when they were babies, ignored them for 32 years, and now you've made their lives the center of your entire existence. What about the family you actually raised? What about the children who stayed?" It was James who had answered, surprising everyone with his insight. He's not trying to replace us, Sarah. He's trying to become the father he wishes he had been to all of us. The question is whether we're mature enough to let him. The conversation that followed had been painful but necessary, a reckoning with the emotional distance that had characterized Patrick's relationship with all his children. James and Sarah had grown up with financial security but emotional scarcity, raised by a man who equated provision with love and success with worth. Marcus and Maya had grown up with neither security nor their father's presence, but they had been raised by a mother who understood that love was measured in attention, patience, and the willingness to see potential in imperfect people. Now, watching Marcus guide his students through a complex arrangement of Lean on Me that somehow managed to incorporate gospel, classical, and contemporary elements, Patrick felt the full weight of what he had lost and what he had been given the chance to find. These children, Keisha Williams, now a sophomore at the Performing Arts High School, Deshaun Patterson, whose voice had indeed grown stronger as it changed, Aaliyah Rodriguez, who had discovered a gift for songwriting that surprised everyone including herself, had become his teachers in ways he was still learning to understand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his amplified voice carrying clearly despite the slight slur that had become more noticeable in recent weeks. "Before we continue with tonight's program, I want to take a moment to thank someone who has shown all of us that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." Patrick felt his chest tighten as Marcus turned to look directly at him. 18 months ago, I met my father for the first time since I was born. I was angry, angrier than I had any right to be, angrier than was healthy for either of us. I had spent 32 years believing that some wounds couldn't heal, that some absences couldn't be filled, that some people couldn't change. I was wrong about all of those things. The auditorium was completely silent, parents and children and community members hanging on Marcus's words with the kind of attention usually reserved for the most important announcements of their lives. My father could have written a check and walked away with a clear conscience. Instead, he chose to stay. He chose to learn. He chose to let a group of middle school musicians teach him what it means to invest in someone else's future without expecting anything in return. He chose to become the kind of man who shows up day after day, not because it's easy or comfortable, but because love, real love, is about commitment that transcends convenience. Patrick felt tears on his face, but made no effort to wipe them away. Around him, the audience was completely still, witnessing something that felt more like a sacrament than a speech. My sister Maya believed that people could change, that redemption was always possible, that love could grow even in the hardest soil. She didn't live to see this concert, but her spirit is in every note we're going to sing tonight. And her faith in the possibility of transformation is standing right there in the front row, wearing a tie that Keisha picked out for him because she said he needed more color in his life. The laughter that rippled through the audience was warm, affectionate, the kind of communal joy that comes from witnessing genuine love in action. Patrick looked down at the bright purple tie that Keisha had indeed insisted he wear, claiming that his usual conservative choices were too boring for a music concert. "These children have taught my father, taught all of us, that family isn't just about blood or biology or the circumstances of your birth. Family is about choice. It's about showing up. It's about believing in someone's potential even when they can't see it themselves. It's about love that doesn't quit, even when everything else falls apart." Marcus paused, steadying himself against the podium as a tremor passed through his left side. When he continued, his voice was stronger, more certain than it had been in months. "Tonight is my last concert as director of this program. The disease that's been eating away at my brain for the past year has finally reached the point where I can no longer do justice to these extraordinary young people. But this isn't an ending, it's a transition. My father, Patrick Shane, has spent the last 18 months learning not just how to fund this program, but how to nurture it. He knows every child's name, every family's story, every dream we're working to make real. More importantly, he understands now that the greatest legacy you can leave isn't money or buildings or monuments to your own success. It's the lives you touch, the potential you help unleash, the love you choose to give especially when it's difficult. The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything Patrick had ever experienced. It wasn't polite applause or obligatory recognition. It was a community celebrating the possibility of transformation, the miracle of second chances, the power of love to heal wounds that seemed too deep for anything but despair. As the applause finally died down and Marcus prepared to conduct the evening's final piece, Patrick felt a hand slip into his. Sarah was crying, her usual composure completely abandoned. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "I'm proud of who you've become." On his other side, James leaned over with the kind of vulnerability Patrick had rarely seen from his eldest son. "I want to help," James said quietly. "With the program, with Marcus, with learning how to be the kind of family that shows up for each other. I want to learn what you've learned." The final song was Amazing Grace, the same piece Marcus had been teaching when Patrick first heard him work with the children. But this version was different, richer, more complex, filled with harmonies that spoke of growth and healing, and the kind of beauty that can only come from voices learning to blend together despite their differences. As the last note faded into silence, Marcus turned one final time to face his students, his family, his community. The smile on his face was radiant, free of regret or fear or the anger that had once defined his relationship with the father who had finally learned how to claim him. "Thank you," Marcus said simply, "for teaching me that music isn't about perfection, it's about harmony. For showing me that family isn't about deserving love, it's about choosing to give it. For proving that some songs are beautiful enough to last forever, even when the voices that sing them eventually fall silent." Patrick stood with the rest of the audience, applauding not just the performance but the transformation it represented. His own transformation from a man who ran from difficulty into one who stayed to work through it. Marcus's transformation from anger into forgiveness. Their collective transformation from strangers bound by biology into a family built on choice, commitment, and the courage to love imperfectly but completely. Later that evening, as Patrick helped Marcus pack up the music room that had become sacred space for both of them, his son moved slowly but deliberately, touching familiar objects with the tenderness of someone saying goodbye. "Are you scared?" Patrick asked, echoing the question that young Aaliyah had posed so many months ago. Marcus considered the question with the same seriousness he had shown then. "Not anymore," he said finally. "I'm grateful. Grateful for these children. Grateful for this work. Grateful that you stayed long enough to become the father I needed you to be. Grateful that Maya was right about the possibility of redemption." "I love you," Patrick said, the words feeling both foreign and completely natural. "I know I have no right to say that after everything, but I need you to know that you are the best thing I've ever done with my life, even though I almost threw it away." Marcus turned to face his father, and Patrick saw not the angry young man he had met in that hospital room, but someone who had found peace with the complications of love and loss and the imperfect beauty of human connection. "I love you too, Dad," Marcus said simply. "I love the man you've become, and I love the man you're still becoming. That's enough. That's more than enough." As they walked out of the music center together, Patrick knew that the hardest parts lay ahead. Marcus's continued decline, the challenge of running a program that served hundreds of children, the ongoing work of building relationships that had been delayed by decades of fear and pride. But he also knew something else. That love, once claimed and nurtured and given room to grow, was stronger than regret, more powerful than guilt, more lasting than any fortune he had ever built. The man who had once denied his children because they didn't match his expectations had learned to see beauty in what was rather than mourning what might have been. It had taken 32 years and the devastating honesty of the dying to teach him what mattered, but some lessons, once learned, changed everything that came after. 18 months after Maya's death, Patrick Shane sat in his office at the music center. At 59, he was learning that some of life's most important lessons came late, but they still counted if you were willing to receive them. The walls were covered with children's artwork, concert programs, and photographs of students who had graduated from the program and gone on to pursue their musical dreams. His desk, once pristine and organized according to corporate efficiency standards, now overflowed with lesson plans, scholarship applications, and handwritten thank you notes from parents whose children had found their voices within these walls. Through the window, he could see the courtyard where Marcus spent his afternoons when the weather was good. The progression of Huntington's disease had stolen much of his son's mobility and most of his speech, but his eyes remained alert, engaged, full of the quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived. Patrick visited with him every day at 3 p.m., sometimes reading aloud from books Marcus could no longer hold, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence while they listened to recordings of past concerts. Today's agenda included interviews for the new program coordinator position, Marcus's formal replacement, though no one could truly replace what he had built. Patrick had learned to conduct these interviews not like a CEO hiring an employee, but like a father protecting his son's legacy. The candidates needed more than musical credentials. They needed to understand that this work was about transformation, about seeing potential in places others overlooked, about love that didn't quit when things got difficult. The first candidate was Keisha Williams, now 25 and fresh from completing her master's degree in music education at Northwestern. She had been one of Marcus's first students, the girl who had hummed Beyoncé with perfect pitch, but couldn't believe in her own voice. Now she sat across from Patrick with the poise of someone who had learned to claim her space in the world, her resume impressive not just for its academic achievements, but for its consistent focus on community service and arts education in underserved populations. "Tell me why you want this job," Patrick said, though he already knew the answer from the way her face lit up when she talked about the program. "Because Mr. Henderson saved my life," Keisha said simply. "Not in some dramatic way, but in the way that matters most. He taught me that my voice mattered, that I had something valuable to offer the world, that I deserved to take up space and make beautiful sounds just because I was human. I want to do that for other kids. I want to be the person for them that he was for me." It was exactly what Patrick had hoped to hear, and exactly what Marcus would have wanted. The decision was easy. Even though the remaining interviews were a formality, they both knew they had to complete. After Keisha left, Patrick walked downstairs to the main rehearsal room, where James was leading a piano class for beginners. His eldest son had surprised everyone, perhaps himself most of all, by discovering a genuine aptitude for teaching music. He had taken a leave of absence from his law firm 6 months earlier, claiming he needed to explore what brought him joy rather than what brought him money. The transformation hadn't been easy. James struggled with patience and perfectionism in ways that reminded Patrick uncomfortably of his younger self. But the children adored him, drawn to his earnest attempts to learn their names and understand their lives. "Dad, we have a problem," James said as the last of his students packed up their folders and headed home. Mrs. Patterson called about Deshaun. Apparently, he's been accepted to the summer intensive at Berkeley, but his family can't afford the travel and housing costs. His grandmother is working 2 jobs already, and she's embarrassed to ask for help. This was the kind of problem Patrick had learned to love solving, not through impersonal charitable donations, but through direct engagement with families who had become part of his extended community. "I'll call her tonight," Patrick said. "We'll figure something out." Deshaun's worked too hard to let money stand between him and his dreams. As the music center quieted for the evening, Patrick made his final stop in Marcus's room. His son was sitting by the window in his wheelchair, watching the older students practice in the courtyard below. Marcus could no longer speak more than a few words at a time, but his communication had become more profound rather than less. A raised eyebrow to show approval, a gentle squeeze of the hand to express love, a smile that conveyed more understanding than most people managed with entire conversations. "Good day," Marcus managed when Patrick settled into the chair beside him. It was a question and an observation wrapped together, the way most of their conversations worked now. "Very good day," Patrick confirmed. "Keisha is going to be perfect. She understands what you built here, what you wanted this place to become. She's going to take care of your children." Marcus's smile was radiant, the kind of expression that made Patrick understand why Maya had always believed in the possibility of redemption. Even as the disease stripped away his son's physical capabilities, it couldn't touch the core of who he was. The teacher, the healer, the man who had learned to transform anger into love and fear into hope. Sarah arrived just as the sun was setting, carrying takeout from the Thai restaurant that had become their weekly tradition. She had moved back to Chicago 6 months earlier, leaving her job in Portland to help manage the expanding network of music centers. Her environmental expertise had proven invaluable in designing sustainable programs that could grow without losing their community focus. "How did the interviews go?" she asked, unpacking containers of pad thai and green curry with the efficiency of someone who had learned to balance multiple responsibilities without losing sight of what mattered most. "We found our person," Patrick said. "Keisha Williams. Marcus taught her when she was 13, and now she's going to carry forward what he started." The circle continues. As they ate dinner together, Patrick, Marcus, Sarah, and James, Patrick marveled at how different this felt from the formal family dinners of his past. There was no performance here, no careful navigation of topics that might reveal uncomfortable truths. This was family as it was meant to be, messy, imperfect, built on choice rather than obligation, sustained by love that had been tested and proven stronger than disappointment. "I have news," Sarah announced as they finished eating. "The Chicago Public Schools Board approved our proposal. Starting next fall, music therapy will be available in 15 elementary schools, all staffed by graduates of our program. Marcus's vision is going citywide." Marcus's eyes filled with tears, happy tears, the kind that came from witnessing dreams exceeded rather than merely fulfilled. Patrick reached over to squeeze his son's hand, feeling the slight pressure that was Marcus's way of squeezing back. After Sarah and James left for their respective homes, Patrick helped Marcus prepare for bed, a routine that had become sacred to both of them. As he adjusted pillows and checked medication schedules, Patrick thought about the man he had been just 3 years earlier. Successful by every external measure but spiritually bankrupt, surrounded by possessions but starved for genuine connection, wealthy in every way except the ones that actually mattered. "Thank you," Patrick said as he tucked the blanket around Marcus's shoulders. It was something he said every night, though the words carried different meanings depending on the day's events. Tonight, he was thanking Marcus for forgiveness, for patience, for the gift of transformation that came through loving someone without conditions or expectations. Marcus looked up at his father with eyes that held no trace of the anger that had once defined their relationship. "Love you, Dad," he whispered, the words slightly slurred but completely clear in their intention. "I love you too, son," Patrick replied. "I love you, and I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful every day that you gave me the chance to become the father you deserve to have." As Patrick drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago, he thought about the letter Maya had written before her death, the one where she had talked about connections that transcend time and space and even death. He felt her presence in the music center that bore Marcus's name, in the children whose lives had been touched by her brother's teaching, in the family that had been rebuilt through loss and forgiveness and the desperate courage of the dying. His phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I won't let you down. I won't let him down." Patrick smiled as he typed back. "You couldn't let us down if you tried. You're exactly who we've been waiting for." The penthouse apartment he returned to each night was smaller now, warmer, filled with photographs of Marcus's students and Sarah's environmental projects and James's tentative attempts at composition. The marble and gold that had once defined his aesthetic had been replaced by handmade gifts from children who had learned to see him not as the famous Patrick Shane, but as Mr. Patrick, the man who remembered their birthdays and cheered at their recitals and helped them believe in futures they had never dared to imagine. In his bedroom, Patrick paused before the framed photograph on his nightstand, the last picture taken of all 4 of his children together, captured at Marcus's final concert. Maya's absence was a physical ache that time had softened but never eliminated, yet her presence was undeniable in the smiles of her siblings, in the love that connected them despite the complicated path they had traveled to find each other. Before sleep, Patrick did what he had done every night for the past 2 years. He wrote in the journal Maya had started for him, documenting not business deals or financial victories, but the small moments that actually constituted a life worth living. Tonight's entry was simple. Keisha will carry Marcus's vision forward. The music continues. Love multiplies rather than divides. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. As sleep claimed him, Patrick Shane, father, grandfather, teacher, and student of the human heart, dreamed not of empires or acquisitions, but of children's voices raised in harmony, of second chances that became new beginnings, of love that proved stronger than every form of brokenness the world could devise. The man who had once denied his children because they didn't match his expectations had learned the most important lesson of all. That love, real love, wasn't about getting what you wanted. It was about learning to want what you were given, and then giving everything you had to help it flourish. In the morning, there would be music lessons to oversee, scholarships to award, children to encourage, and the ongoing work of building a legacy that measured success not in dollars but in dreams fulfilled. There would be Marcus to visit, James to mentor, Sarah to support, and the memory of Maya to honor through every act of love that chose presence over profit, courage over comfort, hope over fear. It was, Patrick thought as consciousness faded into peaceful sleep, exactly the life he had always been meant to live. It had just taken him 62 years and the transformative power of his children's forgiveness to find his way home. The most profound transformations often begin with the simple decision to stay when everything in us wants to run. What would your life look like if you measured success not by what you accumulated, but by the lives you touched and the love you chose to give? Sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave is the proof that people can change, that it's never too late for redemption, and that love, messy, imperfect, persistent love, really can heal the deepest wounds.